The work I'm presenting is resulting from a cooperation between two labs, the LIG and the GSCOP labs from the University of Grenoble Alpes. They correspond to the results of Amr Alyafi's thesis, which have been taken up and extended in Fateh's Boulmaiz current thesis. Patrick, Reignier, and I, Stephane, Ploix, are the co-supervisors. As you certainly know, the introduction of renewables leads to an increase of the use of electricity with a less flexible production. As electricity can only be stored in very small quantities, it is necessary to balance the energy produced with the one consumed. This poses two major problems: improving the sobriety for less consumption and developing flexibility to adapt to the available power from renewables. The residential building sector we are targeting represents about 1/3 of the energy consumed and also 1/3 of the GHG emissions. The problem with reducing waste is that sensitivity to human behavior becomes more important and therefore more difficult to predict. An important perspective is the demand-side management, where an electricity aggregator seeks to directly control the consumption of his customer. This is a problem that remains difficult when looking at the consumption layers here. And even if intervening of heating systems seems to offer interesting perspectives, in reality, it only works in winter, and this raises the problem of the rebound effect, which is difficult to manage. The direct control of the appliances poses real problem of acceptability by inhabitants, whereas the indirect control by the cost or by the nudges such as SMS or others is much more interesting but adds complexity in the daily life for the occupants. Managing one's home remains complex on a daily basis. We have identified various problems related to the routinization of practices, resistance to change, but also lack of knowledge and erroneous beliefs. We have proposed a set of solutions that help with their daily management. Today we will explore the suggest service, that is, recommending actions adapted to the context of a particular day. To recommend action, we generally use models together with optimization algorithms, which can be either regressive model or knowledge model. But in both cases, we encounter difficulties. The first case is subject to co-occurrence of phenomena that induce parameter estimation errors, and in the second case, it is difficult to model a whole household with its environment. Model-based solutions make mass deployment difficult to envisage because it leads to non-evolving partial and specific solutions. A home is unique in terms of its environment, its envelope, its HVAC system, but above all, its inhabitants. We propose here a suggest service for daily energy management based on case-based reasoning without a cause-effect model. The process is the following. We exploit the historical data for an apartment equipped with sensors. Then we normalize the historical data and group them by days. We distinguish the context data of the phenomena undergone, the action data, which are the modifiable phenomena, the effect produced, and the performance sought in terms of cost, comfort, and so on. We verify that the same causes produce the same effects. This corresponds to a completeness hypothesis. If this condition were not satisfied, sensor would have to be added or data histories increased. CBR techniques have already been used in the literature to improve the energy efficiency in buildings, but they did not consider the importance of the occupant behavior in the building energy efficiency. These studies only consider either the indoor or the outdoor environment. Most of them did not take into consideration the difference in magnitude of the different variables related to an environment. Few proposals do, but require the intervention of an expert for the calculation of the weights. For our approach to be applicable, it is necessary to verify the completeness hypothesis. It requires to have enough data from sensors. It also requires the inhabitants to diversify their action, and finally to make sure that the configuration of the dwelling does not change, otherwise it will be necessary to reset the historical database. This diagram represents the vector of context, action, and effect variables for different days. So this is one day. The completeness hypothesis consists in verifying that on each day, when the context and action variable are close, the effects are similar. We see here that red context here and blue actions always induce the yellow effect. By checking this for each type of day, we can verify or not the completeness hypothesis. So all these verifications are based on the notion of distance. We define the weighted sensitive distance, which applies to the causes, that is, to the context and the action variables. This distance corresponds both to a normalization of the magnitudes based on the perceptive sensitivity and to weights which will be adjusted thereafter. We also define the notion of similar effects, which can be translated by it is necessary that the difference between two effects is no more important than the sensitivity resolution of the considered quantity. The issue that arises to determine the weight of the weighted sensitive distance, this is what we are going to see. The algorithm allowing to check the completeness, that is to find the weight of the weighted sensitive distance, is the following. It is based on an optimization problem to solve. The decision variables are the weights of the weighted sensitive distance and the number of neighboring context action clusters. The processing consists in performing a clustering of the days using the weighting sensitive distance with variable weights. The constraints that are that the constraint to be satisfied are that each context action cluster must contain at least 2 days, and that each pair of days within the same cluster must be effect similar. If a solution to the problem is found, the completeness hypothesis is verified, otherwise not. How to suggest effective actions now? We just have to gather the days with a similar context and to look among the diversity of the actions carried out, the most efficient one, and thus deduce the most efficient action already recorded. For example, if we consider the blue context, we identify the set of days circled in green that correspond to a blue context, and we look among the set of recorded actions circled in green, those that produce the best effect. To find the days with a context similar to the candidate day for a suggest, we extract the part of the weighted sensitive distance that concerns the context, and we look for the days with the neighboring context to the candidate day delimited by a threshold context distance. The setting of this threshold is a compromise between similarity and diversity, knowing that the higher the threshold, the more the neighboring days are far from the context, but the more the number of considered days increased, and vice versa. We then choose the best recorded actions from the best recorded effects, and in the sense of sobriety and flexibility. The method has been successfully applied to an office of the Grenoble Institute of Technology. It is equipped with 27 sensors. The variables are grouped into daily vectors. The context includes the temperature outside, the temperature of the adjacent corridor, the carbon dioxide concentration in the corridor, the occupancy, the solar irradiation, and the consumption of the electric equipment. The actions are door opening, window opening, heating set points, and finally effects are the indoor temperature, office carbon dioxide concentration, and energy cost. Here Here is an example of the result we obtained for a 34 consecutive days period where better action were proposed during 13 days. On these 13 days, the recommendation allowed to improve the performance of the action for 10 days. The improvement were from 8 to 18% for the global satisfaction of the occupants related to their comfort. Shown in brown are the daily performance of the actions as recorded, and in red the result of the action as recommended. It can be concluded that as the number of days increase, the performance improvements obtained are better, that different types of performance can be taken into account, which are either related to sobriety, flexibility, or both. The approach is promising but can still be improved because it does not include an adaptation mechanism. That is, it cannot interpolate between 2 days but necessarily take the action of 1 day from the data history. We also noticed that no physical or regressive model were necessary. The only knowledge injected concerned the classification into context, action, and effect variables. The advantage of this approach is its capability to be very easy to deploy, but also to put the inhabitants in the loop of the daily energy management. They are responsible for the diversification of the action. It is up to them, to the inhabitants, to explore, and they are the ones who ultimately decide to act or not. Obviously, the quality of the result depends on the diversity of actions appearing in the historical database, so on the inhabitants' exploration of their environment. In the future, we plan to develop an adaptation mechanism and an action diversification support service.